Welcome to the Founder Hour podcast. Before we get into the episode, just a quick word about our sponsor, Outer. You know I've raved about Outer before, and I love my Outer sofa, outdoor dining table, and chairs. I've had them for over a year, and let me tell you, they've been through everything from rainstorms to scorching sun and still look brand new. That's because Outer makes outdoor furniture that's actually designed for the outdoors. From using incredibly durable and sustainable materials to developing innovative solutions like the Outer Shell cover, which protects my sofa and dining table against dust, debris, and dirt. No more soggy cushions or dusty tabletops. My Outer setup is always clean, dry, and ready to be enjoyed anytime I want. Head to liveouter.com/thefounderhour to see Outer's range of outdoor furniture, fire pits, and accessories. The Founder Hour listeners get an exclusive 10% off for a limited time. Terms and conditions apply. So elevate your outdoor space with Outer. That's liveouter.com/thefounderhour. Here we go. Angie Hicks, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Really excited to dive in and learn about your story, your journey, everything you have created and everything you're up to now. But I saw you grow up in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
I did.
Tell me a little bit about early life for Angie. Like, what was childhood like? What did you enjoy spending your time doing?
Sure. I grew up in Fort Wayne. My dad was a UPS driver. My mom was a bank teller. I just a very middle class upbringing. I didn't have a lot of exposure to an entrepreneurial environment, clearly. I was probably, I call myself pretty shy, quite honestly. I was more of a book geek than anything else. Love to get to know people, love to, kind of build good relationships, which I think is something that has been a key and kind of a key thread through the entire business. Yeah.
What were you like into interest wise? Like, did you have any particular things that you're like, maybe I could be this one day when I grow up?
So as I went through college and I was thinking about what I could be, at first I thought I was going to be a teacher, which I think a lot of times young people go through that phase, especially girls. And then I wanted to be a lawyer, but then realized I was probably not outgoing enough to be a lawyer. At least
Right.
The lawyer that I saw on TV was a trial lawyer, right?
Yep.
Then I thought about being an actuary. I loved math. So I was going to figure out how long we were all going to live and how much the insurance payout should be. Really exciting.
Fun.
And then in the end, I was, when I got to the end of college, I was most likely going to be, my offer was to go off and be a business consultant. I was an economics major in college, and it was the mid-90s, and business consulting was the most likely path.
What did you, when you finished college, what was that early career like? What did you spend your time like doing out in the world? Yeah,
so I started Angie's List, which is now Angie, right after college.
Oh, okay.
So, it was kind of a crazy path, and I think when I look back on it, kind of an interesting path. So, in college, I was in a business program where we did an internship during one of the semesters in college, and I ended up interning for the guy who became my co-founder, and he worked for a small venture capital firm there in the Midwest, and what I liked about that venture capital experience was I liked small businesses. I was just, as I said, I was kind of quiet and shy, and I was like, I worked better in smaller environments. So I was like, hey, I'd love to start work in a small business. And so I would mail out resumes, and in the hopes, because it was, a while ago, mail out resumes in the hopes of getting a response, and didn't really hear anything. And then one day Bill called me and said, hey, it's a crazy idea. Why don't we start a business? Your parents are going to hate the idea, but let's just give it a try. I'll raise, enough money, $50,000 to get us through a year, and we'll see what happens. And, it's like, I wanted to say no every which way I could.
Yeah.
It was like, I was not a risk taker. I was very much a kind of, let's come with a practical plan, the reliable path. And so I really thought about it for a long time until I finally ended up asking my grandfather, who grew up during the Depression and was a really conservative guy, paid cash for his house. He couldn't handle having his mortgage. And he was like, Angie, what do you have to lose?
Yeah.
What really is the difference between being 22 and looking for a job and being 23 and looking for a job? Mm-hmm. And as Bill told me, he said, look, it's either going to work or it's not. And if it doesn't, you'll have a great business school resume.
Yeah. And this is Bill Osterly?
Bill Osterly, exactly.
What was his, how long had he been like a venture capitalist or in the industry?
So he was an associate at a venture capital firm. So he was only a few years older than I was. So he was probably out of business school, gosh, maybe 4 or 5 years at that point.
Yeah.
And he didn't start in the business right away. So he kept his day job, and he was kind of doing this at night.
He's like, I'll just hire an intern to do it.
He exactly right. He dreamt of having an army of interns someday that could do everything.
Amazing. Amazing.
Like, okay.
One of them hits, then I'll just like leave my cushy job. And
that's exactly what happened. Then he left his job and
Amazing. I love the strategy, honestly. It's great.
Exactly. So I graduated from college and then, put all my worldly possessions in my Ford Escort and moved from Indiana to Ohio, where he lived, and started basically a replica of a little business he had discovered in Indianapolis called Unified Neighbors that kept track of who the good contractors were in town. And it was a call-in service. You'd call in and talk to Jean, who answered the phone there, and she'd tell you who was good and who wasn't. And it was just, everybody knew about it. It had been around for about 20 years at that point. And, Bill had used it to renovate his house in Indianapolis and then went to Ohio and was stuck. He had bad experience. He bought a fixer-upper, and he still started looking around. I was like, there's nothing like this around anywhere.
So it's very localized.
It was only basically in the northern suburbs of Indianapolis.
Interesting. So and 20 years it existed and no one else had created
a copy.
Why is that? Why do you think?
I think maybe it was because it was in the northern suburbs of Indianapolis and it was kind of its little best kept secret. It was just an example of it was like a neighborhood newsletter. And so we started our own. We said, okay, here's a model. Let's go see if we can figure out how to make our own in Columbus. So we launched what was then Columbus Neighbors.
Love it. What was the big opportunity that Bill at the time saw in terms of how, is this something that he thought you could just build and scale across the country? That
was always our plan. So when we started, and the great thing was, we had a business model we could look at, right? He had been a member of the Indianapolis one. He understood, how much consumers were paying. He knew that they took advertising in their newsletter, so he could model kind of some initial numbers. And we figured, hey, if it's Indianapolis, Columbus, we're about the 50th largest cities in the country. If it's hard to find an electrician or a plumber in one of those cities, it's harder in LA and Chicago and New York. So we always figured we could expand, but we didn't know how we were going to expand. For us, we thought at the beginning that being local meant you were local. So we opened offices in a city as we went, hired local people to answer the calls, because we didn't know how much of that kind of magic in the business was because you had, kind of a super expert local, the Gene in Indianapolis,
right,
and how much of it was truly just the content you were collecting from the homeowners.
In that first discussion that you guys had about this, did you feel like, wow, this is such a great idea? This is going to be a huge business one day?
No. Yeah. If we roll back to, the mid 90s, not a lot of people weren't talking about starting consumer-based entrepreneurial businesses. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't kind of the hype that it was,
this
kind of
pre-internet?
in 2000. It was pre-internet.
Yeah.
Our first email address for the business was an AOL email address.
I remember those.
Yeah. We had a fax machine. A thermal fax machine.
That meant you were innovative at the time.
We were so innovative. And so there wasn't a lot of talk. There wasn't a lot. We knew there was a business model here and we knew there was a model that worked, but we built it as an offline business in the early days.
Yeah. I read that you went door to door to get your first 1,000, I think, customers or members early on. Tell me about that time. Okay. So you guys decide this is what we want to pursue. And you form a business, and then what happens?
So the great thing about having that business in Indy that we could pattern after, everything was great except for they didn't have a marketing plan where they were viably using at that point, because the Indianapolis business had basically turned into an annuity. It
was just like a word of mouth thing. People just
it was absolutely word of mouth. It had super high retention rates for consumers, and basically people didn't renew because they died, and then they referred
virtually
enough
no competition.
people.
Sounds like it was just they were the place.
Exactly. So in the early 70s, the guys that started Unified Neighbors started it going door to door. In fact, they were actually, instead of selling Unified Neighbors to begin with, they actually were installing peepholes in kind of exterior doors so that you could look out and see if someone was coming to your door.
Wow.
And and then they realized they could collect a lot of content and build out this business. But so door to door was the model we used. Unfortunately, we had me as the sole employee, and as you might imagine, door to door was not my strong suit. I was, declared introvert. I mean, it was miserable for me.
Yeah,
I was like, the thought of going out and knocking on doors. It was not a fun time.
Yeah.
And and it was like I'd measure sales. I mean, it was like, hey, if I could sell one membership a day, I mean, it was like 1 or 2 would be huge. And, kind of the analytical side of me came out. I was like, okay, I've got to knock on this many doors in order to to sell this many memberships, and that's just what I have to do.
So, what was the membership like? What did it entail? Like they would pay like an annual fee to
right. They signed up. It was we based it off of journalism in many ways. So it was we viewed it like a magazine. So it was $19 a year to subscribe, and you got our newsletter that came out once a month. It had some coupons from companies that were highly rated, covered articles around home improvement, and then you could call in and check ratings on different companies. And so you were asking them for $20.
Yeah. And in any two-sided marketplace, it's always this chicken and egg thing of
so I was going to go to next. It was the chicken and the egg. Right. So one of my favorite conversations was one of the first few people that signed up. Her name was Patty Bowman, and she lived near Bill in Columbus. And I went and talked to her, and, I was explaining to her what we were doing, and she got up and she was like, you know what? I'm going to take 2 memberships. I'm going to take one for myself and one for my son. I was like, that is fantastic. She's like, so how many members do you have? I was like, well, that makes 3. And she got me her church directory, and she said, you call every person in this directory and you tell them that Patty Bowman said they had to join. And then she went and got a list of all the contractors she had used, because that was the challenge. I had to build out the list.
Yep.
So inevitably what was happening is someone would call in and say, I need this or that. I may not have it. And so I would have to then call members and say, hey, I need a review on this type of service. Have you hired somebody to replace your windows? Have you done this or that? And so it was a bit of I was the connector. It was a bit of a telephone game. I'm like, I'll get back to you within, a couple hours, and I'll have a name for you that you can use. Nice.
But you figured your initial approach was going to be, let me get as many members as I can, not as many vendors as I can, essentially.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Because for us, the vendors had to be rated by the consumer. So the consumers, in fact, built the list. So the consumers would say, hey, I use this company. Here's the review I gave them. And that's how they would get listed. And so we were building an online, it wasn't online at that time. We were building a review platform before there were really review platforms.
Right. Yeah. I figured like down the line when like companies like Yelp and all these came out, eventually they sort of adopted the same model, it sounds like. Yeah.
And I think what made us unique in kind of the review space was kind of our heritage. So, we didn't believe in anonymous reviews. And I think that's one of the things, kind of that we have to do is build accountability about what we find and make, we've seen that play out in later years of how you make sure that what you're reading online isn't just fake. So we would only take reviews from the members. And so therefore we patterned a journalist, and that, there's no story without a source. And, the consumer's name, while not known to everybody once we went online, wasn't known to everybody who could see it. It was known to us as the company, and it was also known to the pro they were rating. Because, we believe there should be a fair way for a pro to be able to respond to a review. They can't change a review. They can't take down a review, but they should be able to respond. And they can only respond intelligently if they know what job they're talking about.
Do you think, or did you see that deterred anyone from giving honest reviews?
It might have, like on the margin, we probably lost a few negative reviews but in the grand scheme of things, the integrity it brought to the rest of the reviews was worth it. I don't need just someone coming and just complaining and being unwilling to take ownership for what they're saying. when it comes to your home, I mean, this is big money that people spend on home improvements. I mean, our home is oftentimes our largest asset. So if you're replacing a roof and it's, $15,000 or $20,000, you want to make sure that the information that you're basing that decision on around who to hire is quality.
Yeah. So tell me about the time you're doing door to door. You're out of your comfort zone. You've never done this before. You're saying it's the worst point, probably in your life.
I did a lot of crying.
I can only imagine. And I always am so fascinated when someone has done that and been successful. I'm just curious, like, what did you take away from that experience?
I took away from it. I mean, honestly, it taught me. It taught me that sometimes you have to do things you don't enjoy. It reminded me of probably the characteristic I had more of than I thought it was, which is perseverance. And it taught me how to tackle those things. It's just like, hey, you got, you're not always going to do things you like to do. And when you're an entrepreneur, there's a lot of things that need to be done, and not all of them are going to be your favorite. But it's important that you try and you understand, because that just helps you grow and learn. And, let me tell you, the next person that we hired was a salesperson.
Yeah. Right. But still, that's a grind, going door to door. And I can imagine times were different back then, but still, like, you're just knocking on a stranger's door and they're opening it, and they're just like.
But being able to give the spiel and being able to kind of have the passion of being able to figure out how to sell something, I think is really important. I had, there was, we could fast forward 20 years later, and, one of our new sales reps who was selling pros, she emailed me, was like, Angie, I need to meet you. I find that I sell best when I hear directly from, the founder, like what their passion is.
Right.
And, she came up, we talked for a couple of minutes, and I was like, hey, here's how we started. Here's how I tackle it. Here's what we do. And, she's like, very appreciative. She went back and, for several years after that, was our very best salesperson.
I love that.
It's kind of like, it's like that, like your job as, the entrepreneur in that regard is creating that excitement and energy for the company so that it doesn't fall flat.
Yeah. So it sounds like it was really successful. You signed up like 1,000 in the first year, which shows that clearly, like in today's terms, there was a product market fit, right?
Yeah.
But I guess, did you face, I'm sure you faced a lot of rejection at the same time. Like, what were some of those conversations like? Like, what were you hearing from people? Positive and negative.
I mean, so that, the people that were liking it, the consumers that liked it were like, hey, this is a great way for, me to find things that I never know who to hire. I'm looking at yard signs. I'm asking my neighbors. It's a lot of work to go find out who's good and who's bad. And we were collectively doing that for the community. But for some homeowners, it was like, look, I know my people. I'm good. Right. Like, but they haven't thought that, like, when you think about home improvement, there's hundreds of tasks that you might know you're a couple of people, but you probably don't know everybody, and they just haven't come across the need for one. I used to joke around. I was like, if I just spent my evenings going around breaking windows, I'd probably increase sales, but I didn't do that.
Right.
I think some of my hardest conversations were honestly with pros who got a complaint.
Mm.
It was like they'd get kind of angry, and I'd have to take those calls, and I was like, and to this day, probably one of my conversations is, one of the common conversations I have is just like how to handle negative criticism.
Yeah.
I think sometimes, people tend to overreact. You're never going to please everyone.
Right.
You need to fix what you can fix, apologize for what you've done wrong, but you've got to move past it, and it'll show up in the numbers. I mean, I actually, when I look at reviews or read, content and feedback about companies, I was like, I often actually look for that negative feedback, because you can learn a lot about a company there. Totally, because they can never control that everything's going to go right, but how they handle it when the chips are down tell you whether, that's the company you want.
Yeah. I, just seeing firsthand, or even just like having friends or people that I see are like, improving their home, whatever they're remodeling or doing something. It's just a high stress thing, right? Like, it's just are they going to do a good job? Are they going to show up on time? Are they going to be reliable? Or is it going to cost me what they say it's going to cost me? And
they're in your home.
And they're in my home.
They're having breakfast with us because they show up early to work.
Right. So I can imagine, like, as much as the likelihood of there being issues or frustrations or negative situations, on the flip side, if someone does do a good job, then you almost like have a customer for life, and you're going to recommend them to everybody.
And that is exactly the thing about home improvement contractors, the ones that are really good. I mean, they're good at selling, they're good at kind of showing their work, and they're good at building loyal customers. I was talking to a pro the other day that I've known forever. Like, she was kind of in the early days, and I'd forgotten, but then she reminded me, like, she's a remodeler, and after she finishes each of her remodeling jobs, she makes a homemade dinner for her clients, because she's like, they need to experience their new kitchen.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And kind of like, and that's how, and you experience it best by gathering the family around and having a nice dinner.
So how long did it take? Because 95, I think, was when it started.
Yes.
And that was like right when the internet's taken off, and
Right.
this is like the perfect business for the internet, right?
Right.
Like, what was that time like in terms of seeing it take off and deciding? I think it was in 99 you decided to take it online. So like 4 years later.
Correct.
Right before the bust. But
Yep.
what was that time like?
So in the early years, I mean, we got to the point where we were opening a market a year. So we got Columbus off the ground, ended up rebranding it from Columbus Neighbors to Angie's List, and then ended up buying that Unified Neighbors, the business in Indianapolis, the next year, and then started opened in Cleveland, opened in Charlotte, and just building them up from scratch. Each one kind of created its own unique, interesting opportunities. I mean, I remember opening in Cleveland, and I was like, we had this little clip art ad we ran in the daily newspaper when we gave up my door-to-door sales efforts. We started advertising. I was tired of lousy service, and I remember going and picking up a copy of the Plain Dealer and flipping through and seeing this little ad in the Plain Dealer. It's the same ad, by the way, that we later ran in the LA Times and in the New York Times. So the same little tiny clip art ad.
If it works, it
works exactly. Yeah. I'm like, I'm not one to say, kind of don't fix if it's not broken. Right. They tended to kind of take off, but we were we were a local advertiser, and that was the biggest expense in the business, was building out that local marketing and building out that consumer base. But we realized that at some point we will be able to flip to national advertising potentially, because this is even before there was a lot of digital advertising, right? So it was, we were in PR, daily newspaper, weekly newspapers, local magazines. And so we knew that was going to be a big point for us, but it took us about 10 years before we got to that point, before we were able to make that flip.
Yeah. And so the idea was like, we're just going to open up as many markets and just like,
and we looked at them each individually. It was like, each of them had their own P&L, and we're like, okay, we'll get one, kind of, we know it takes this long to kind of flip it profitable. And then we have one, then we'll open another one. And, Bill and I later in years were kind of like, you know what? Maybe we should have just stopped at 2 markets. We could have each just, because the woman that was running Unified Neighbors in Indianapolis was, basically golfing every day. We were like, it would have been a lovely lifestyle business, but we had too much aspiration beyond that.
Yeah. Like, in terms of the, I guess the markets, what was the determining factor of like where you should go next?
Yeah.
Because every city, every state, they have like their own zoning laws and reasons why someone might have to like, the process that they have to go through, like all these different things.
There was not a great, that is an area that we could have improved strategy.
Okay. Yeah.
So, there's a reason that a lot of businesses open on the coast. There's lots of people there. Mm-hmm. We instead opened where we had people that we knew. So we had an investor that lived in Cleveland. So we were like, hey, Jim, you can kind of explain Cleveland to us and help us get the inside scoop there. Had an investor in Charlotte. Michael, you can explain Charlotte to us. We actually kind of danced around opening Chicago for a long time because we knew the marketing spend was going to be a lot more expensive.
Yeah.
So we finally, dove in, and, guess what? Chicago worked out really well because, their marketing, while more expensive, also reached a ton more people.
Mm-hmm. What were some challenges that early on you might have faced in terms of just getting it off the ground, but also like making sure that it was, people were being reputable and about their reviews, and that you're building this like business that can sustain it for the long term?
Yeah. So, I mean, there were various things, and you could kind of run the gamut. I mean, we had a bit of a playbook that we built out from a marketing perspective. Charlotte was a tough city. We almost closed Charlotte. Wow. It was the funniest thing. I mean, it was like, it's a town that I feel like no one was actually from. Yet it was the biggest town of kind of insiders. We couldn't break in.
Huh.
We couldn't break in. And so we eventually just lowered the marketing spend and kind of just let it run itself organically to see if we could finally get it turned around. Finally, it kind of took off, but it was slow at best.
Were there these like local major players that like controlled like the city?
Well, in that, I mean, our market launch, I mean, getting some local PR was always important for us. It was like whether it was an article in the paper or being on the local news or things like that to kind of be known and kind of known in the community. And in Charlotte, we just couldn't break in. And we finally did, but it was several years after we opened.
Customers are rushing to your store. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. Shopify POS is your command center for your retail store. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify has everything you need to sell in person. Get hardware that fits your business. Take payments by smartphone, transform your tablet into a point of sale system, or use Shopify's POS Go mobile device for a battle-tested solution. Plus, Shopify's award-winning help is there to support your success every step of the way. Do retail right with Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/founderhour. Once again, go to shopify.com/founderhour to take your retail business to the next level today. Often when there's a new like innovative concept that comes out and it starts catching wind and, traction and people start taking notice, you start seeing like Me Too's pop up and competitors pop up. Did that happen ever?
It absolutely did. And especially right around 2000 or in kind of 2000 when the internet bubble was kind of coming into play, there was a ton of competitors that came into the space. I mean, a lot of venture capital money came into the space. And for most of the competitors, they charged pros, but didn't charge homeowners. So it was free for homeowners. And we had a big debate internally as to whether we were actually really concerned, like they're giving our product away. And, and what we realized, we decided to bet on our two-sided marketplace and bet on the fact that we were going to collect revenue on both sides. But what we realized was because the consumers were giving us all the content, pros would be on Angie's list based on their reviews, and they didn't. Only if they wanted to get extra exposure would they choose to advertise with us.
So there was like an advertising.
There was an advertising option, but it was after they already got on there. They had their good track record, so they were already getting some business. So what we discovered was what we were selling was easier because we were calling them up and saying, "Hey, do you like the leads that you're getting from Angie?
Yeah.
Do you want to get more? Here's some options for you to get more exposure," versus the competitors that were calling cold and saying, "I can drive customers for you."
Yeah.
And so quickly, a lot of money went in, competitors popped up.
Yeah.
And they didn't
I understand like if you're looking at it from a pure like business standpoint, it makes sense to like, let's do this as an enterprise thing. Let's charge the businesses that have the capital and they want customers. And let customers and give this sort of like a way or free to these customers, because it almost seems like I guess the question I would have would be like, what would make them stick around long enough? Like, are they improving their home that much that they need to be like annual members? And like, like I would, if I was looking at it from the outside in, I'd be like, this type of business would lead to like a lot of churn. Like they would just like not stick around. But I guess why did people stick around?
Well, I think it was the fact that we were there when they needed us. I mean, it was an annual subscription. So they were, and it wasn't a ton of money. Yeah. I mean, for the average homeowner, I mean, it was like how many Starbucks equates to, $20, right? So it wasn't a ton of money for them to engage in. And so they would stick around. If they had good experiences, they stuck around. It just became kind of part of owning their home. But, as we discovered and kind of as we moved closer, kind of in the last kind of decade or so, I mean, we realized that, it was going to be important for us to open up the content itself for free to homeowners, but really looked at other ways that we could add extra benefits to homeowners that the membership could actually revolve around versus just a straight kind of getting access to the listings.
Mm-hmm. So what led to taking the company public in 2011?
So we got to the point where we were doing national advertising and we had the opportunity to continue to grow the business. And what we discovered was that we could scale faster than we were. So while we never aspired to take a business public, we were like, hey, there's just a real opportunity here that we should access additional funds so that we could grow. I mean, I think in our wildest dreams, kind of in 2009, 2010, 2009 probably, we were like, hey, like if we ever spent $25 million marketing, that would be just huge. Right. That would just be all we would ever need. And we blew through that effectively, and we're kind of like, okay, we actually could be spending more. So going public became the route to continue to expand the marketing.
I think I saw in 2015 was like the first profitable year that Angie's List had since 20 years since starting the company. And obviously there's different reasons why that could be, like for every different company. But I guess what was the reason? Were you just, like you said, spending so much on marketing?
We were scaling marketing. So it was one of those that we were like, we knew that the consumers would stick around, and we knew we could pull back the marketing if we needed to, but it was a bit of a land grab.
It's like a game you got to play.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not easy to run a business unprofitably for that many years, but we did. I mean, there was a couple of times we had to flip it positive to prove that we could, but effectively we're going after scale.
And were you CEO when you took it public?
I was not. I was my co-founder was a CEO. So Bill was a CEO. So he joined about 3 or 4 years into the business. Yeah.
So he was doing all the public company stuff, the earnings calls, that
exactly.
Kind of stuff. What led to the acquisition by IAC in 2017? So this is like a few years, 6 years after you went public.
Yeah. So I mean, it was we were at a point where we were kind of evolving the business model and thinking about. So we were at that point where we were flipping over to that freemium model. And, IAC had the other biggest player in the space, and it was an opportunity for us to combine those two businesses together and really kind of be a much bigger force in the marketplace. So, opted to sell it to IAC at that point. And then they spun Angi out as a public company, but they're still the controlling shareholder.
Yeah, and that's when the rebrand from Angie's List became Angi.
Yeah.
Right?
So I mean, it was theory of like, hey, let's modernize. I mean, we were much more than a list, right? It was much more than just kind of that paper trail that we had built back in 1995. I mean, you could schedule, there was message, there was lots of things you could do when it came to it. So we wanted to benefit from the branding around Angie's List, but modernize the brand.
Since then, I think I saw you moved to Chief Customer Officer role. What has that been like? What do you kind of spend your days doing?
Yeah. So it's been a lot of fun, actually. It's in many ways, it's the type of thing that I enjoy doing the most. So I spend a lot of time actually talking to our customers. I am a big believer that in a world of technology, we sometimes forget to actually have conversations and have relationships with people. And I believe being accessible really can set a cultural tone for an organization that can be important. So while I had done this kind of ad hoc over the years, I've actually, even the last few years, have really formalized this. So, pros or homeowners can sign up to talk to me live. I dedicate time every single week to these conversations.
I was going to ask, like, do you call them? Like, do they just get a call me like, hey, it's Angie? Like, oh shoot, Angie's calling me.
Yeah, exactly. Angie's calling me. I need to take this. So they can sign up to take a call, and we'll talk about whatever they want. Yeah. And I think it connects. Our belief is that we want to build long-term relationships with all of our customers. And I think part of that is having, an open line of communication. So they can sign up. We'll talk about whatever they're interested in talking about, whether it's, how their, advertising is performing with us, to kind of advice on growing their business, to kind of think, kind of topics about the industry. And then consumers can talk about, anything about projects. I mean, like, I've become the biggest user, I might have been 22 when I started the business, but I probably have more projects going at any given time than most, and love to talk about projects. So those conversations are a lot of fun. And then I can take that back and turn that into good feedback for the product team and for the the care organization, and really use that to drive change.
Since that like early sort of internet era of like the 90s, obviously we've seen so many sort of cycles since then, and so many new technologies come out, like social media and now like artificial intelligence on all these things. How has technology played a role in the company, like, as throughout the years? And are there any like emerging technologies that you see playing a role in the future, not just for Angie, but like home services and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think, we've always like from the Angie perspective, I've always thought about technology in the early days as something that would enable. We didn't start out as a technology business. And when we put our website up, I mean, we paid some college kids $1,000 to build our very first website. But we just saw it as another way to access that content. We really believed our business was the content and was really the, kind of knowing who the great contractors were. And that continued, kind of to grow and facilitate. But then over time, we were realizing like, hey, there's a lot of things that we've come to expect. Consumers' expectations have gone up. Kind of the baby boomers and the Gen Xers are like, hey, if you could just get me the phone number of a pro, that's great. I will call them.
We don't want phone numbers now. We want
exactly.
emails
Now I'm
or
like,
social media
I want
pages.
to tap and like schedule and, I want everything just like right here on my phone.
Yeah.
And so we think about ways that we can evolve the product to do that. But still realizing that these are big projects that require, a very much an offline experience. A lot of pros today still come and give you an estimate. And I guess, it's hard to kind of give you a estimate on your kitchen remodel without seeing your kitchen and kind of sitting down and understanding what you're looking for, because they're just complicated projects. But other services like roofing, for example, I mean, it's amazing the technology that there is now that you can kind of go and kind of get it. They can actually tell you how big your roof is. I mean, I did this the other day with gutter cleaning, and she was like, "Oh no, I know how big your house is. I just looked it up. We're set. Here's your price, and we'll get your gutters cleaned." So there's technology is kind of starting to evolve for pros as well. When I think about kind of the future, I think there's clearly going to be kind of the products that we use in our house are becoming more high tech. It's like, kind of repairing a furnace today is very different than repairing a furnace 20 years ago. I mean, it's got a computer in it and all this kind of stuff, which then gets you to the point of like, hey, do I as the homeowner, have to know that something's broken? Or will there be a day where, hey, the furnace can tell Angie when it's broken, right? And we can get
Angie,
someone out there. I feel like we're talking about the Jetsons, right? It's like, yeah. And I think AI is an interesting opportunity as well. I mean, we recently did a report, our skilled labor report, and clearly pros are in a very good position when it comes from an AI perspective, because AI might tell us how to paint a wall, but it's probably not going to paint the wall anytime soon. But I think there's ways that AI can be used to make their job easier, just like some of these scoping technology that's come out that helps them. There's going to be additional things that will drive ease to the industry as well.
Yeah, it's going to be crazy to see. I feel like every day I'm seeing something that I didn't think was possible become possible.
Yeah. I mean, now you can like, I'm going to go, I want to see what this paint color is going to look like in my house. I mean, it used to be that we'd, hold a little tiny paint swatch up on the wall and kind of look at it for a while and decide whether you like it. Now you're like, I can do a 3D kind of look at my house.
Put some goggles on.
Yeah.
Crazy. What's a personal habit or routine that you've maybe adopted over the years that you feel like has contributed to being a successful entrepreneur, business owner? Just like building a business is grueling, right? Like there's so many aspects to it that could really wear you down, right? Whether it's the management aspect, whether it's the competition aspect, just your own personal mental aspect. Like, is there anything that you
I mean, I think for me, it's always been like, how do you balance the things you love to do, the things you have to do? And there's always kind of extra things in the way. So kind of creating discipline for yourself. I mean, it's like, if I can, like if there are things that aren't like my favorite thing to do, I like to do those early in the day. I like to get those, and kind of save the things that I love to do later in the day. For example, I mean, I would build in tricks like that. Not that they're tricks, but just ways to make sure that I was kind of saving kind of the fun stuff for later to kind of help pull you through the harder stuff. Is one of the things. I think, making sure that you're, honest about what you're good at and what you're not good at. I mean, back to the sales, I wasn't good at that. I think sometimes entrepreneurs forget to kind of be honest with themselves and maybe hold on to things too long that they're not the best for, and forget to bring in people that can help in those areas. So I think that's an element.
Yeah, I think entrepreneurs are naturally like of the mindset. Maybe it's like this optimism that they have of like, well, just because I'm not good at it today doesn't mean I can't be good at it with some work or some repetitions.
Right.
But just naturally, sometimes it's just you're not that person. Like you have other strengths that you should be doubling down on.
Do I have to perfect a skill from scratch that I don't have, or do I actually just get good at finding people that can do those types of things? And and that is really important. And I think figuring out how to let go of things, I think can sometimes be one of the hardest things. I mean, I remember like up until having like my second child, I was buying myself all of our media. Of our media. Like I would negotiate all the contracts. My second child was due at the time of the year that
That's
I would
like
buy all the media. Exactly. So I found some young gal on my team. I was like, Trisha, you're going to be in charge of buying the media. So I laid out exactly what I was hoping for. And I was like, I was always a hard negotiator. So then I was like, okay, I'm just going to give her even a harder hurdle. So I was like, I kind of brought the prices down even 10% from where I would have settled for. And she wanted to make sure she was proving herself. So we probably got the best. Down another 10%. Exactly. We got the best rates we'd ever got. And I was like, I have not bought a piece of media since,
Just keep lowering the 10%.
So it's like, sometimes you have to force those activities. I think also, when being an entrepreneur can be grueling and, kind of, it's sometimes, it's having to remember that it's a marathon and not a sprint. I think sometimes people go into being an entrepreneur because like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to have an exit in 2 years and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I'm closing in on 30 years now. I think you have to build in, kind of balance in your life yourself as well, because it can become wholeheartedly your life.
Yeah.
I mean, I started when I was single and 22. Got married, had 3 kids, and that I've raised throughout the business. And you have to make your life a priority for you. And I think that's advice for anyone, whether you're an entrepreneur or not. Kind of those trade-offs are your trade-offs. It's like no matter how great your boss is, they're not going to come up to you and say, hey, Pat, weren't you supposed to be at your son's soccer game right now?
Yeah.
But you wanted to be at your son's soccer game. So it's like it's choosing to make those boundaries for yourself is what can help you go for the long haul too.
And doing this for 30 years, not having had any other job, like this is like all you've done in your career. And that's a stretch of time when you change like multiple times. Like you're not the same person you were when you were 21, 22.
Right.
Did you ever think, and granted, like you've had a very successful career and built an incredibly successful company, but were there ever times where you just felt should I go do something else? Like, should I try something? What if I could be the next president of the United States? Or like, what if not that specifically, because that's a whole different thing, but I'm just throwing out examples.
I mean, it's it could be anything. I could be anything. So I think, so I did, after we were in the business for about 3 years, I did leave and went to business school.
Okay.
And
so you were out of the business at that time?
Well, I mean, I was still like keeping the books and paying the bills, but I was out of the business at that time.
Yeah. And did you go?
I was in school full time.
Did you go with the intention of coming back to
I did not make that commitment.
Okay.
So I think that was an interesting time for me. Had I not gone to business school, I would not be at the business today. I was actually completely burnt out. Like, it's like.
Was it called Angie's List at the time?
Uh-huh.
Oh, it was. Okay.
It was. Our namesake. I was like, I'm out. I'm like, it's just too hard. Yeah. I'm like, I was young. I didn't know anything about business. I was everything was new to me back then. And it was just hard.
What did you go to? Like, what was your intention for going to business school?
So my intention was a break from the business, actually. I mean, I didn't aspire.
Wasn't to switch careers or anything?
No, I mean, but I didn't commit to come back either. So when I was getting done with so I did interview coming out of business school, and I was going to go marketing and consumer packaged companies. And I was in an interview one day, and the guy that was interviewing me that was probably going to be my boss. He would ask me a question. I'd give him an answer, and he'd just look at me and say, thank you. And they'd ask me another question. And I walked out of that interview. It was like one of those moments in life where you realize what's important.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it's about the people you work with. Mm-hmm. You can do marketing anywhere. You can do engineering anywhere. You can do product anywhere. But if you don't work for people that are invested in you and can help you grow, that's going to make a huge dramatic difference in your career path. And I was like, there's no way I'm working for that guy.
I totally agree, but I think the difficult thing is like people can barely find job opportunities these days, let alone being quote unquote picky, even though I think you should be as well. To like find the right people to work with. It's like it's almost seems like you're asking for too much at that point, even though I think that should be the way. It's like, how do you like entertain all these job opportunities? It's just like it just seems like it's a very hard thing to do.
And so I think it's when you're thinking about opportunities. I mean, I totally agree. You're not, all the stars don't align. You're not going to have 3 offers set up and you're going to get to choose. But
I almost feel like we need an Angie's list for like the hiring managers.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. But I guess my point is like when you're kind of thinking about the things that are important to you.
Yeah.
You're kind of like, gosh, I'm thinking about what I'm going to be doing. I'm thinking about how much I'm going to be paid. Don't forget about who you're going to be working with.
Yeah.
Because that one is not always the front and center one when you're making that job decision, but could be the, kind of that supercharged element that you don't realize at the time. And I would always also encourage you, once you're in a company, kind of like seek out people that are going to be, kind of a champion for you. And once you find them, hang on to them.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did you said you were burned out. You wanted to kind of explore other options. You did these interviews. You're like, nope, not for me. Did you just like, how did you get reinvigorated to like get back?
So then I called my co-founder up. He'd come in when I went to business school and joined full time. And I was like, hey, I'm coming back. And he looks at me and he's just like, well, I don't think we have the money. I was like, what? And I'm like,
my name's on the business.
I'm like, back. You know what? I'm coming back. And I hung up on him. I was like, so I'm coming back. And, and lo and behold, he had a new guy that was kind of running the financials for us, our new chief operating officer. And, he kind of tweaked each of the assumptions in the model enough that made it incredibly conservative, that made it look like we might run the thing out of business. Yeah. So needless to say, I went back. We didn't run it out of business. And turned out to be, kind of a great decision, even though at the time before I made that decision, I was like, do I want to go back there? Am I going to learn? Am I going to really evolve? Is it going to feel like the same? I think when you're in a career kind of is, even if you're in a career 5 years, kind of like, how do I kind of reinvent myself? How do I think about learning new things? And for me, the 2 elements that I come back to when I kind of decide, do I stay or do I go, is, do I like the people I'm working with? And am I learning new things that are interesting?
Which I feel like sometimes is, in any job, I feel like you're going to get to a point where it just feels repetitive.
Yep.
So you almost have to introduce that. You just can't expect it to happen. You have
to there are times in my career that I like will set aside time and be like, I have to go figure out a way to make something new and interesting. I mean, for example, I was like, it was last year, I guess it was, I started a pro council for the company. I was like, we need some fresh insights. We need some, I need to be engaged
that
more.
Are on the platform are part of that council.
Yeah. I got a dozen pros that I meet with every couple of months. Nice. And, you've got to find ways to kind of bring freshness to and new perspective, which I think is, and that's on you. I think, kind of you as the individual to kind of think of those ways that are going to kind of help you evolve kind of what you offer.
Yeah. Some of the chatter these days, especially with folks who are in business school or coming out of business school, it's interesting. I gave a talk in a class recently at USC, which is my alma mater. And like, it was an entrepreneurship class. And a lot of the students were talking about wanting to get into like micro private equity and like roll up these, like buy out these like local service companies, home services, and like create these like conglomerates.
And run roofing companies and plumbing companies.
That's the idea. But it seems like I see it all over like the internet too, like people talking about how there's like an opportunity there. I'm just curious what you think. And this was going to lead to my question about just like the future of the space. Mm-hmm. Where do you think it's going? Like, do you think that there's going to be all these individual sort of mom and pop? I can imagine the reason for that is because folks who started these businesses in the 70s and 80s, like their kids might not want to take it over, but there's like a clientele there. There's like a full on business. Yep. What do you do with that business? Like, so what do you think happens moving forward?
Yeah. I mean, I think, and this has been something that has happened for decades, quite honestly. Like there are kind of rolled up organizations. I mean, I remember in the late 90s, a group came through and was buying up all the heating and cooling companies. You know,
now it's like pool cleaning and like
I mean, so that happens, but it's still not the lion's share of kind of the industry. The vast majority of the industry are kind of small mom and pops that are, you know, kind of 4 people or less that have decided to hang, you know, their shingle. And you're right, at some point they choose to retire. And do they sell the business? Do the kids come on and run the business?
Like, have you spoken to like some of these pros about succession planning in terms of their small businesses? Like, what happens when they're no longer in a position to?
Yeah, I mean, it runs the gamut. You know, some will sell to another, you know, kind of individual that wants to run it. Others will sell to a bigger organization, and that's how, you know, a lot of these companies that, you know, kind of have franchises or such will build up, and then, you know, others will end up, quite honestly, passing down either to family or to kind of the next person in line in the company. Yeah,
it could be someone like an employee that has been there for like 30 years or something. What does the future look like for you? Like, what's kind of in the plans, in the works? Or do you foresee yourself like staying in the business for the next, you know, several decades? Or
I love what we do. I mean, this is just one of those things that's like you kind of develop. Like, while I may not have had passion for what we do at 22 because I didn't understand it, didn't have a history in my family of hiring a lot of contractors, but I do, and I see that there's so much opportunity. While the vast majority, you know, still today, I mean, there's still so much to be done to bring more of the home services experience online, to be able to help facilitate that. And it's, you know, it's evolving, and I'd love to see that continue. And I love being a part of it.
Yeah. And speaking of passions, sometimes, you know, your work and your passion might not be the same thing, and that's okay. Like, as long as you have like you leave enough room, I guess, in your day or your life to experience those passions, because life's short and you don't want to be working every day all day. So what are some of those passions for you, like, throughout the years?
I mean,
have you been golfing? Did you ever get to that point?
No, I'm a horrible golfer. Okay. I tried. It's like when neither my husband nor I are good golfers. It's quite comical. No, but you know, it's like I have a farm, so I'm growing a little apple orchard. I've got a garden. I've got to actually plant my pumpkins hopefully later this week is my goal. You know, so, you know, like, my kids are high school, college, so, you know, kind of I'm their number one fan. We just finished up with my middle child, who was on the swim team and cross country, so I was going to meets and doing things like that. So you find those fun things along the way, and just make them part of it. Yeah.
Well, Angie, this has been such a fun conversation. I feel like we can go so many different ways, but in terms of just like the story and like all the sort of wisdom that you've acquired, you know, throughout your career, appreciate you coming by and sharing it with us.
Thank you.